Welcome, my friends, back to Beyond the Well, where forgotten histories and untold legends awaken. I never expected to find that well, hidden deep in the woods behind my house. But when I touched its sacred water, I saw more than my own reflection. I saw another world. A world shaped by light and shadow, by heroes and tyrants, by choices that still echo through time. Join me as I uncover the stories of Aldarion that lie beyond the well. Morvana, Harbinger of Destruction, Episode 6, The Birth of the Mavir. The city of Korvale breathed differently now, edgy, watchful, stressed. Gone were the vibrant streets and bustling markets that had once marked Lovak's northern jewel. Instead, an uneasy stillness lingered. Conversations were shorter, eyes shifted warily, doors closed earlier. Fear had become routine. The people did not speak of what lurked beneath the surface. They only knew its name whispered behind closed doors. Mavir. And the governor, the leader of this once powerful city, knew it. Governor Jerres had lived through unrest before. Famine, riots, the ever-present threat of pirates from the sea. But this was different. This was a quiet corruption, spreading like poison through the veins of the city. It moved silently. The Mavir were everywhere, and yet nowhere at all. Jerres felt it the first time he tried to send word to the High King. He had sent messengers weeks ago to Salkaris. A simple request for reinforcement, a call for direction. The king's hand was growing weak, his advisors distracted by personal interests and indulgences. Jerres had no illusions. He was but a steward to a kingdom he could not control. Yet the king had always been an ally, a steady presence. At least, that's how it had been. But now his letters remained unanswered. His messengers, when they did come, came bearing excuses, cryptic statements of matters being delayed or communications just cut off altogether. Jerres' frustrations grew with each passing day. The usual channels of communication had been severed. "Do you hear it?" Jerres asked one morning, pacing before his desk. He had summoned his most trusted advisor, a middle-aged man named Rixel. The advisor's face was drawn, eyes dark with the weight of the city's shadows. Rixel hesitated. "The rumors, you mean?" Jerres nodded, his hands clenched tightly in front of him. "The Mavir, they're here, aren't they? Not just whispers in the street, but they've infiltrated. They control the messages, the letters, even the roads. How many have you seen watching the gates?" Rixel didn't answer immediately. His gaze averted as he shifted uneasily in his chair. The question was too direct, too pointed. He knew what Jerres suspected, and he knew that the governor was not blind to the slow suffocation of his power. There are no easy answers, sir. It's not just the messengers, it's everything. Guards who were once loyal now walk with their heads down. Officials, city folk, even the priests. They whisper like they're hiding something. Jerres stopped pacing and stared at Rixel, his lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't want whispers. I want action." His tone was sharp, the frustration palpable. "If the king will not respond, I need something to act on. We have a duty to the people, to this city, to ourselves, and to Aldarion." Rixel shifted uncomfortably. "There's more, Jerres. The priests, the ones who used to guide the temple, they've been silent. The high priest himself was oddly accommodating, considering the rumors." Jerres' eyes narrowed. "Accommodating? You mean he's complicit?" Rixel sighed, his face betraying more than he intended. "No, I don't know, not exactly, but he has said nothing to dissuade the rumors. His temple burns incense to Aldarion, but the people feel no hope, only exhaustion. They've lost faith, and in its place, I'm afraid something else has crept in." Some say it's a return to old ways, to something long buried. Jerres ran a hand through his graying hairs. So, it's true then. Korvale has become a breeding ground for these shadowed figures. The Mavir are not just lurking in the alleyways, they've moved into the very heart of the city. Rixel's gaze narrowed, uneasily glancing toward the window where the shadows of dusk had already begun to stretch across the streets below. I fear they've already reached many inner circles. The whispers, they're not rumors anymore. I think it's a network. The weight of realization settled into Jerres' chest like a stone. The High King cannot be blind in this, he muttered, turning back to his desk where stacks of unread reports awaited. The capital's advisors must know. How can they not know? Rixel's voice dropped, a hint of uncertainty creeping in. The king has... And he hesitated. Changed. Rixel knew these were dangerous words, but regardless, his duty called him to say them. It seems he is more interested in personal indulgences, while his people suffer. There, he had said it. The words lingered between them like smoke, and for a moment Jerres said nothing. He had seen the cracks in the kingdom's foundations for some time now, slight, subtle, like hairline fractures in a great stone structure. But now those fractures had deepened into full breaks. The Mavir were, of course, coming to fill that void. Find me something, Rixel, Jerres commanded, his voice cold. Find me proof. I'll take it to the king myself. He will listen if I present in person and with the right impact. I just know he will. But the words felt hollow in his mouth. The letters, after all, had been sent. The message was clear, yet still unanswered. His trust in the king, shaky at best, was fading, and the fear of what lay beneath Korvale had settled into his bones like the chill of winter. The night felt heavier than most. The moon, thin and pale, hung over the city like a distant eye watching the unfolding darkness. Korvale, once a place of power and pride, had become a den of whispers. The streets had quieted earlier than usual, the clamor of merchants and street vendors replaced by silence. People knew better than to speak openly anymore about this new entity. At the Jerres estate, the heavy weight of fear had become routine. His household guards had long been loyal, and Jerres found hope in that. This night he had sent them into the city to look and listen, to find something he could take and show to the High King. That left him and his family vulnerable, but he felt it was well worth the risk. Inside Jerres' study, the governor paced restlessly. He hadn't expected it to come to this, but after the scene at the Blessing of the Crown, he knew something was coming. Then, a heavy and deliberate knock at the door made his heart skip. He moved quickly from his study to the front door and opened it without hesitation. But what stood before him froze him in place. Morvana was there, his black cloak pooled around him. Behind him, Valkyra moved silently, the sleek panther blending into the shadows, her eyes gleaming like twin golden suns. For a moment, Jerres stood frozen in the doorway. He didn't speak. He didn't know how to. His tongue was stuck. But Morvana did. We need to talk. Morvana's voice was smooth, yet held a chill that sank into Jerres' bones. May I come in? He stepped inside regardless, and Valkyra followed silently, her paws making no sound on the marble floors. Jerres' mouth was dry. The fear he felt was immobilizing. The door slowly creaked shut and then clicked behind him. The commanding presence of this creature was beyond words. Sit, Morvana said simply, motioning to the chair across from his desk. Jerres did, his movements stiff, his mind racing. He made no move to speak, and silence stretched. Jerres could feel his own breath catch in his throat. The weight of Morvana's presence filled the room. Do you know why I'm here? Morvana's question hung in the air, barely a whisper, yet it rattled Jerres like a death sentence. Jerres swallowed hard. You're the center of this rot in the city. Morvana chuckled. Surely you know that resistance is futile. For a moment, Jerres' mind flitted to the things he had heard, the rumors of miracles and death, the strange reports of people vanishing, the unexpected disappearances. He had tried to ignore them, dismiss them as the usual noise from the more superstitious parts of the city, but now they seemed to come full circle with a ticking clock counting down to an inevitable end. Your city, Morvana continued. There's so much potential in a place like this. So many people, so many broken things. And like any broken thing, they're ready to be repaired. Yet someone has to be willing to do the work. Jerres felt a cold spike of fear run down his spine. He knew exactly what Morvana meant. This wasn't a threat, it was an offer, and it was worse than anything he could have imagined. You've had your chance, Jerres, Morvana said, his voice a mere breath now. You've seen the truth, but you haven't acted. You've watched the power slip from your hands, and yet you remain blind to the fact that you have no power left to control. You've allowed the king's absence to cripple you. You're a puppet, and you don't even know who's pulling your strings. Jerres stopped pacing and turned back to face Morvana, his fists clenched. Enough! I've given my life to the city, to the High King, and now you come here telling me how to run it. Run it? Morvana's laugh was sharp and cold. You've never run it. Not in any meaningful way. You've held it together because it suited the High King, but now the Mavir move in, quietly, under the surface, and you've let them in. Jerres' heart hammered in his chest. What do you want, Morvana? Morvana stepped closer, his gaze never leaving Jerres. I want you to understand something, Jerres. There are those who stand above kingdoms and crowns. This is where true power is born. You either join us, or you become a footnote in history. You think the High King will save you? Look at him. He's a fool, surrounded by people who will do his bidding without question. He's blind to what's happening. Do not speak of him that way. Jerres' voice was hoarse, fury beginning to flood his chest. The king, he's still my king, and I will be loyal to him, even if you, he pointed a shaking finger at Morvana, are the devil himself. Morvana remained unmoved, his silence lingering, and his mask steadily looking at him with an unnerving presence. I gave you a chance, Jerres, and I will offer you one more. Bend the knee, serve the Mavir, or I will make an example of you. Valkyria, who had been silent until now, let out a low growl. Jerres didn't flinch. Instead, he stood tall, glaring at the masked figure before him. You don't scare me. You think you can break me? You've already broken the city, but I will die standing before I kneel to you. Morvana's eyes glittered with dark amusement. Very well. We will see if you can still stand after what comes next. Jerres stiffened, ready for the next round of threats, but Morvana raised a hand, signaling to the shadows. The heavy door opened and two figures stepped in, carrying with them Jerres' wife and son. His wife, wide-eyed and trembling, barely registered the shock. She was confused, terrified, unsure of what was happening. She reached out for Jerres, her voice barely a whisper as she tried to make some sense of the scene. Morvana's voice dropped, cold and precise. Do you understand now, Jerres? I could take their lives, or you can choose to serve. The Mavir are not just shadow, we are the future. Jerres' heart dropped as he saw his son, his little boy, struggling within the grip of the Mavir guard. His wife, wide-eyed with terror, turned to him, her fear and confusion growing. Jerres' knees weakened, his mind racing for a way to protect them. You can't, no. I can, and I will, Morvana said softly, his mask tilting slightly. The choice is yours. Serve us. Join us. The implication hung in the air like a noose. Jerres' resolve melted, and his knees finally gave in as he crumpled to the floor. He held open his arms, and Morvana signaled the release of the family. They rushed to him, and Morvana faded back into the night. The morning sun crept over Korvale, but its light brought no warmth to Jerres' heart. His estate felt colder than it ever had, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the terror that swept through it the night before. Jerres, alone in his study, stared at the door. The two most important people of his life had fled. The three of them had spent the night together in their bed. His resolve had hardened. He could not let this menace take over. But he had to get his family out. He was willing to die if he must, but not them, not his family. So he had sent them off in the early morning before the sun had risen. Lars, his most trusted servant, had taken his wife and son in their fastest coach. They were headed to his wife's brother's estate in the neighboring province. Once he knew they were safe, then he could act. And act he would. He knew those who had loyalties to him, and he would ferret out this poison. Jerres moved mechanically and methodically. The Mavir were everywhere, every corner, every alley, even some of the servants in his home he had become wary of. He did not know who to trust. He knew sending his wife and son away was risky, but it was his only hope. He had sent his two most trusted guards with him, both very capable with the sword. He wished he had been able to send more, but there just wasn't time. The sooner, the better. The hours passed in a blur. Jerres watched from his windows as he made plans, but he couldn't get his mind off his son and his wife. They should be far away from here by now, safe, at least for a little while. His gut twisted when he heard the door open behind him. His heart stopped as a messenger, ragged and out of breath, arrived with a heavy box. Jerres looked at it with terror. He tore it from the man's hands, set it on the ground, and his blood froze at the sight of what was inside. It was the head of his wife. Her eyes still wide in terror, her mouth frozen in a silent scream. The head was cleanly severed, though the blood had already begun to congeal, staining the cloth around it. The Mavir's unmistakable signature was all over it. Torture, fear, control. His knees buckled beneath him, but Jerres did not cry. He couldn't, not yet. His anger surged, burning like a wildfire in his veins. But then he saw the message, written in the blood of his sweetheart. Your son will suffer the same fate if you defy us. Comply, or the boy will be lost to you forever. Morvana's words, Jerres could hear them in his mind, as clear as if Morvana had been standing right beside him. Submit, or I will break you. Jerres' rage exploded. He knew what he had to do. Standing, he called to his guard and told them to assemble. He was going to his closest advisor, Rixel. Together they would go one by one to the powerful members of the city council. He would root out this evil no matter the cost. Rage filled his heart. It consumed his soul. Immediately, Jerres put the plan in motion. He gathered his most trusted guards, those still loyal to the crown, though he knew they were few. His mind raced with calculations, the growing dread of failure clawing at him with every step. Jerres stormed into the city guardhouse and rallied the troops there. He went to the Temple of Aldarion and gathered the priests. He went to the Merchants Guild and pulled the leaders into his group. From all he gathered as much as he could, discovering what was likely to be the headquarters and where he could find the heart of this Mavir cult. His guards, Rixel, the growing crowd, kept up, grim but steady, knowing what was at stake. The Mavir's grip on Korvale had only tightened in the past few days, and Jerres could feel it in his bones. Together the group made their way to the lower part of town. Jerres discovered that there was an old chapel, a ruined chapel, in the poorer district of town. There he went with his crowd, smashing the doors open to the front of the chapel and moving towards the back where a narrow corridor led down into the basement, into the catacombs. His breath was heavy and he felt a surging thrum of darkness push against him. He stopped. Jerres gripped his sword. He looked at those around him, took a deep breath, and prepared to enter the enemy's den. With a surge of adrenaline, he broke through the door. His son, bound and bloodied, stood in the center. Jerres froze, his blood running cold. His guards, Rixel, the people behind him came moving in around, entering the room and encircling. Then, in unison, they all looked towards Morvana, who had just entered from the opposite side of the chamber, and they bowed. Jerres' guards turned on him. They were not his loyal men anymore. They were pawns in the game of the Mavir. Rixel stepped forward, calm, calculating, unperturbed by Jerres' shock. "You should have known this was the outcome, Jerres," Rixel said, his voice soft but final. "The Mavir's influence is deeper than you realize, and your son will be the price you pay for defiance." Jerres fought with all his might, his sword cleaving through the air as he desperately attempted to defend himself, but it was futile. The guards held him back, and Rixel's cold eyes met his unblinking. He walked up to Jerres and tapped him on the nose, then turned, raised his right hand and clenched it into a fist. Then the guards began their butchery right there in front of Jerres' son. The blood splattered across the stone floor. Jerres' last words rang through the stone hall. Son, be a man, be strong, I love..." He was cut off from the final blade stroke that took him down to the stone floor. Then Morvana walked up to the boy and lifted the sobbing youth's chin to force his gaze upon himself. "You see what happens to those who resist. You will learn quickly, yes." Morvana knelt down in front of the boy, who sobbed and hung his head. Yes, we shall see." In the royal chambers of High King Moralen, the news arrived early, but the king's attention was far from the matter at hand. His advisors gathered around a lavish feast, plates of roasted meat and golden fruits laid out before them. The scent of wine and perfumed air filled the room, mingling with the heavy heat of the hearth. The High King lounged back in his chair, laughing with his concubines, oblivious to the murmur of concern that began to fill the room. A messenger entered, bowing low with the weight of the letter in his hand. "My lord, a message from Korvale," his voice slightly trembling. The High King waved a lazy hand, his eyes already drifting back to his feast and the succulent women next to him. Yes, read it, man, it can't be too important." The messenger hesitated but complied, unfurling the letter and reading aloud. "High King, please know Governor Jerres is dead, killed by unknown hands. His family has been lost. The city now searches for his son." The room went still. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the distant muffled hum of the city beyond the palace walls. The High King's laughter died in his throat. His eyes flickered to the messenger, then his advisors, who exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Dead?" Moralen repeated, his voice quieter. "Killed?" His gaze slowly turned towards the letter, blurring in front of him for a moment. The words felt distant, detached, like something he didn't want to see. Something he could simply ignore and not have to worry about. Yes, Jerres was a good man. I trusted him, of course. Life happens. Murdered? Surely not. I won't believe it. And besides, Jerres often was rather, how shall I say? The king put his finger to his chin. Tight. The king then thought back on the number of times he had invited Jerres and his beautiful wife to their revelries, only to be denied. He waved the letter aside. "Send word, then. Have a new governor put in place." "A pity," the king said, shaking his head. The messenger, his posture still stiff and nervous, lingered a moment too long. "Shall I send someone to inspect?" He glanced nervously at the king. The king, already turning his attention back to his feast, scoffed. Inspect? What for? A man dies, so be it. We have bigger concerns than one man's death. His eyes glittered with a self-assured smirk. He looked around the chambers and felt a sting of discomfort. Yes, very well. Indeed, we do need to know. My guess it was some faction of the high priests there. Religion had never been in the king's favor. The high king's voice carried as he raised his goblet. Who's to say it wasn't some rebellious faction in the city? Yes, send an envoy to Korvale. Have a new governor installed. Make sure they are loyal to the crown, to Lovak. That is all that matters. Oh, and have an investigation started. I'd very much like to know what has happened. He turned to his Velark, the High Counselor and closest advisor. Yes, High Velark Gorash. See to this personally. I want an answer. The Velark, adorned in his most lavish purple robes, nodded and withdrew, snapping his fingers at the guards to follow. The king settled back in his seat and chuckled as he pinched the cheek of his latest favorite, a concubine from Durhambach. Life happens, but we must enjoy what we have. He chuckled and raised a goblet of wine. The bard started playing a wistful tune in the corner, and laughter began afresh as the group resumed its play. Outside the palace, Velark Gorash felt a weight. Something was coming for him. The world was changing, and he was intent on finding it, on pulling this new change into his sphere, where he would have power. The world was indeed changing. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the ruined chapel beneath Korvale's lower district, the Mavir were already preparing for their next step. The Council of Reclamation sat in a dimly lit room beneath the earth. The walls scarred and cracked, candles flickered in the pools of wax as Morvana stood at the head of its table, mask gleaming faintly in the half-light. The silence was palpable, oppressive even, as Morvana scanned the room. Around him sat men and women of various walks, nobles, priests, ex-generals, each one cloaked in shadow. None dared look him in the eye. Morvana's presence consumed the room, drawing them into the dark orbit he had created. Korvale is ours, Morvana said, his voice a whisper that echoed loudly. It is only the beginning. Rixel, one of the newest council members, shifted, leaning forward with a thin smile. He had a hint that Morvana's plans were far from over. Your Highness, what of the High King? Rixel asked, his voice low but tinged with curiosity and submission. Surely he'll investigate. Morvana's gaze flicked to him cold and unwavering. Oh, I'm counting on it. He thinks his kingdom is secure. He believes this uprising is nothing more than a handful of whispers in the dark. Ignorance is powerful. So powerful. We've planted the seed. Korvale is but the first city. Now we move outward. We spread our influence to the capital, and soon the High King will be nothing but a pawn in our own hands, just a piece in the game. The room fell silent again. The air thickened with the weight of the Mavir dominance, their plans now set in motion. The council members nodded in agreement, understanding that the shifting power had already begun. A thrill of power shot through them all, and they relished the feeling. They were the hidden force that would tear the kingdom apart from the inside and leave them in power. A few weeks later, the High Velark Gorash returned to the king. He bore wonderful news. A new leader had indeed been chosen. Jerres' son, in fact. Youthful though he was, he had stepped forward and was willing to bear the burden of responsibility that stood before him. High King, the boy sends a gift as a representation of his undying loyalty to the crown and to Lovak. Gorash handed the king a vintage bottle of wine. Oh, yes, I know this year and this vineyard. The king had a lustful look in his eye as he took the bottle. This boy has excellent taste. He indeed will make a fine ruler. Gorash smiled, thinking back on his last week in Korvale. The king glanced back at his Velark and nodded, then turned and began walking back into his private chambers, calling to his concubines. He didn't notice the darkness that now surrounded his Velark. nor did he see the hatred that seeped from his most trusted advisor. The High Velarg Gorash smiled as he turned and walked out, his new bodyguards falling in behind him. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for coming with me beyond the well. If you enjoyed this story, please consider liking, following, or subscribing. And if you have a moment, I would love a review. Your feedback truly makes a difference. If you want to dive deeper into the well, visit beyondthewell.net for show notes, transcripts, maps, character descriptions, and much, much more. And until next time, keep seeking, keep dreaming, and keep telling your story.